Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I have seen Marvel's Thunderbolts. I actually saw it on release day, even though I'm only just uploading this video now. And this review will initially be a no spoilers review for those of you, of course, who haven't seen it yet and are wondering about my take. And I just get into the overall review vibe of the movie. But of course, as we get further into the video later on, I'll get into my spoiler thoughts on some of the bigger things of Thunderbolts, the bigger things that interest me, the post-credit scenes and whatnot. So, with that out the way, Thunderbolts, Thunderbolts, Thunderbolts. I guess to start off in this review, I want to say that, as you may have noticed, I haven't exactly reviewed every single Marvel movie, MCU movie, that's come out in recent times on this YouTube channel. So I suppose it's more of a pick and choose thing for me for a few reasons. But to that larger point here, I also think the sad reality is that I believe MCU movies have also become a bit of a pick and choose thing in general for comic book fans. And maybe that extends to the general audience alike, to the point of where, you know, the question is asked these days, hey, do I even buy this ticket? Where once upon a time, if I like, nah, I'm definitely going to see this one, I'm going to see that one, I'm going to see this one. And I think that is because, and trust me, there is a point to me saying all of this at first. Well, some of the Marvel movies lately haven't really quite done it for audiences and fans for a variety of reasons. Now, sure, that's not to say that they're not entertaining still or that people haven't enjoyed them. What I mean to say there is just we're all very aware that comic book movies need to do something a smidge more to connect with audiences, to make them care beyond the superficial formula some more than others have relied upon, and in turn have got a bit repetitive. So all of that is to say, ladies and gentlemen, that Thunderbolts, man, I am very happy to say that this is where it hones in way more successfully than other MCU movies, some recent, some not so recent, whatever, right? But you get my point. And that makes it stand out. For me, it rejuvenates the space with the current character lineup in the MCU, and thus offers potential for MCU movies in general going forward. I'm not saying that this is the most perfect MCU movie ever made. No, but it's so refreshing of a Marvel movie out of the lineup that we've had that it does a lot of things, or, you know, rather showcases great effort with what makes up this movie, which in turn combats the very flaws that have made previous Marvel movies feel, you know, just a little bit lackluster to many. Now, on paper, Thunderbolts, I think, to a lot of people felt like it at first, well, okay, yeah, sure, yay, we like Bucky. Some of us love Florence Pugh and Yelena, and oh wow, David Harbour's, you know, as Red Guardian, he's very entertaining, and Wyatt Russell, he was pretty damn good in Falcon and the Winter Soldier as US Agent. You know, what I'm trying to say is, before the marketing really started rolling out, I think on paper, especially given the way that Marvel movies have been received by audiences the past few years, you know, obviously in an ideal world, they would have been really successful and there wouldn't have been this commentary around it. But the way they have been, the question was somewhat, you know, is Thunderbolts going to be another one of those? And I think that a portion of that thinking lies in the idea of the whole, did we ask for this sentiment that goes around online? Or who asked for this? With some in the larger audience thinking that, you know, movies that are only worth making or seeing are the ones that are only about the biggest and most popular characters with whatever belongs to which franchise, Marvel or DC. I do want to stress that I totally get how that's a knee-jerk desire, and that can be a whole video and discussion in of itself, but to try and simplify it, the more you go down that path after, you know, making comic book movies for the past 20, 30 plus years, the more I feel like you do risk beating a dead horse with certain characters, also relying on those most popular characters too much for your success, among also the mistake of just not investing in propelling other characters that are in your catalog to become the next set of popular characters that audiences care about and want to invest in. So Thunderbolts, I think in hindsight here, early on in its development, and barely before we got into marketing, but everyone knew about it, you can totally understand the conversation that dabbled in apprehension of another venture like this being perhaps mediocre at best. But then the marketing did start. And for me, guys, there was something about it which, for the first time in what feels like quite a long time, long story long, I had a good feeling about this one. And now, with that long-ass kind of preface-y kind of thing at the beginning here, now that I've seen it, I can say that I really enjoyed this movie. And it feels like, I know this is, it's the best Marvel movie since whatever, but it does feel like one of the best MCU movies in a long while. And I really hope that it does really, really well on the box office, because it absolutely deserves to do so, to show Marvel that, hey, movies like this, with the qualities it has, is precisely what will lead to more successes like this. You do not want to regress from this point and what you achieved here through resonating to an audience member like, well, not even just myself, but all the other people who were saying good things about Thunderbolts. So getting more into this now, the whole cast, for me, was pretty much fantastic. Like, you might go in there expecting to like a couple more so than others, I guess you could say, but each of them really do rapidly grow on you more and more as the story progresses, whether you're familiar with these characters from other projects or not. The chemistry between the cast, just the group in general, is absolutely brilliant, and they all work really well together, starting as that somewhat reluctant working together situation to become something that becomes this natural rhythm to the point of where these guys just roll together so well, whether that be just in the conversation, to the back and forth digs or jokes. Not every joke lands, but there was never any like, oh man, I'm cringing hard or anything. To even when they're like fighting as a team, it's great. Especially that one moment when they're all going at Sentry and he's kind of batting them away like pesky flies. That was for sure a standout moment in the movie that I think you should look forward to if you're planning on seeing this. Now, having said that, I absolutely agree that Florence Pugh is the highlight. There's no other way for me to put it, which might not be a surprise since she is the front and center of a lot of the marketing. Like, from the trailers, you can gather that she is kind of this baseline of what launches you into the movie. But Florence Pugh really brought her A game with her performance, with moments that just got me to, even tear up. Really, her story allowed me to care about her character so much more, with just how much more we got of her and what the movie was, talking about, the present day perspective that she has on how her life is going and, what haunts her from her past. And the same can really be said with all of the other characters, because with the Thunderbolts story in general, when you take a look at where each character is at the beginning of the movie and what motivations each one of them has in order to go on the mission that ultimately, bands them together. I just feel like, to sum that part up, it offers a really strong foundation and broadly this great through line in the movie for character exploration, exploring their struggles, their self-worth, and in doing so, offering that substance I keep going on about. And the way it implements that, this is where, you could bring in Sentry into the conversation behind the guise of Valentina, who's vying for power, and the overall allegory, if you will, that surrounds mental health, was done really, really well in my mind and was quite impressive. And I say that because, again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here. It's this kind of substance, and I'm not calling it like a bloody Scorsese movie, of substance. I'm just saying it has layers and depth and substance to it that you do get in other Marvel. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's just sometimes, not executed in the best way, or there's little drib drabs of it, and you don't get. This movie is from start to finish a consistent, progressive dive of layered substance and just good storytelling in my mind. Sure, you might have little nitpicks here and there, but that in of itself is a refreshing ass thing to me. And it makes total sense, because characters like Yelena have been through some extremely messed up shit in the past, and they've done extremely messed up stuff. Like Bucky, do I even need to go there? John Walker? So again, like, there is a really robust through line there, which in turn provides that one thing that makes an audience care about a movie. And that is one thing I try and talk a lot about on the channel when just observing films and what makes audiences connect to films. Now, I'm not saying you don't sometimes just want to turn your brain off and watch a movie like Fast and Furious. I'm not saying movies like that aren't fun and entertaining, where you don't need all like the layer and substance to things, right? But in a world, in a Hollywood that's filled with products like that, which we enjoy, sometimes that leads to that repetition and spectacle fatigue. And overall, just past the general entertainment that we can all get from movies, the very thing that separates movies like, I would say, Thunderbolts and other examples from that of your typical kind of popcorn movie, and that is the audience caring about the characters. You care about what happens. So as the plot unfolds and also provides, in my opinion, like a really well shot adventure, as I found myself like really appreciating the way that they shot scenes, certain action scenes, the way sometimes it was super smooth, but then you would get this kind of, in certain scenes of tension, this handheld camera mode. That was all really impressive to me as well. Now, of course, in the movie, as is the case with a lot of comic book movies, there's going to be things that happen when the Boba kind of critical hat was on. I can't help it, and where it's kind of like, well, that happened and that was very convenient, so I guess you could say there's a contrived moment or two or three that I noticed, if you will. But I'm kind of willing to be a lot more forgiving on stuff. Like, it's not a critical point of mine, but when that doesn't happen like every bloody 2 minutes like it sometimes does, that is where you're like, okay, yeah, I noticed that, okay. But like, when looking at all the other areas that the movie excels in, it doesn't seem like something to double and triple and quadruple down on and beat the movie over the head senselessly with. Now, something I guess I want to chuck in here in terms of commentary is that I also think that with the way recent MCU phases have been handled, when you see this movie and you know that Doomsday is really just around the corner after Fantastic Four, it feels like there should have been more breathing room to allow these great characters to be explored more until we launched into that. So I guess what I'm saying is that it would have been cool to have Thunderbolts been slated to release maybe much earlier if they could have done that. And on that note, we could have even had Fantastic Four quite a bit earlier. And then that would have allowed some breathing room and space, which builds to Doomsday. But it's kind of like, oh, Thunderbolts, first time with this team, like, together kind of thing, and the status quo that they're in the MCU. Fantastic Four, first time with that team, but then boom, Doomsday. Once you see this, you might know what I'm saying, where you're like, okay, it would have been cool to have this earlier on, and then you could have maybe had a little bit of another thing or two in terms of projects, and then Doomsday. Now, getting to the end of the no spoilers-y kind of talk here, we're going to talk more about the villain or the antagonist and stuff in the post-credits in just a moment. But speaking of post-credits, 200% stay for both post-credit scenes, especially the second one. I'm pretty sure it's like almost a 3-minute post-credit scene, which, if I remember correctly, this could have been the longest post-credit scene in the MCU history, and genuinely, it propels you into something in the MCU that is not only really fascinating with what is going on, but also with what is teased in the future. It's hard to talk about this, but it's not one of those teasers where it's like, oh, well, this isn't really going to go anywhere again. It's like, damn, no, this is actually a post-credit scene of substance. So that was pretty freaking cool. And I don't want to be that person and be like, oh, this feels like the early MCU post-credit scene, or this feels like, but it does. It does, especially after having watched the movie and caring about what I just watched. That felt good. Should you see this movie? Well, if you haven't seen it and you just watch this no spoiler bit to get my idea on that, yeah, man, like, absolutely. This is worth buying a movie ticket for. I literally encourage you to do so, and I hope you go on to get the same moving experience, coupled, of course, with the Marvel comic book entertainment that you'd want out of it, like I did. I'm not trying to overhype it, and I may have accidentally done that, and people might come back and be like, oh, Boba, you oversold the crap out of that, but I think for me, the reason why I'm as passionate as I am is because this feels refreshing. I'd be pretty damn hard-pressed to believe somebody going into this movie and coming out and saying, that was crap. Okay, so now to get into some spoiler talk, I guess you could go away now if you haven't seen the movie and then come back or whatever after you've seen the movie. This video is getting on, so I'm probably only going to go over some of the biggest things, spoiler-wise, that appeal to me. So I suppose I want to launch right into the conflict of the movie, right? And how that bleeds into other things, which brings me more into Sentry, as a lot bounces off, obviously, from there. And I found him to be quite an interesting antagonist in the movie, if you will. I mean, I like how similar to how in the comics he suffers from these psychiatric issues, and if you combine that with this experimental super soldier serum, yeah, like that can end up with an extremely complex situation when somebody isn't in their right mind. But as I always say, adaptations don't copy and paste. So Bob here, and I'm seeing a lot of different perspectives online, despite how well received this movie is. There's like little criticisms here and there. And for me, Sentry was, more or less used as a lab rat alongside many others in the effort to bring about Project Sentry. And with that storyline, I really do feel like Lewis Pullman did a really good job with what he was given for the MCU's iteration, if you will, of Sentry. His powers and situation that is brought about in the movie clearly works really, really well when paired up with the introspective journey of the Thunderbolts and what each one of them is going through and propels them to unite and do. I can understand that if you're a super hardcore fan of the comic book character, that this movie, I suppose, quite vastly accelerated Bob into Sentry and going straight into the void, which I guess they did because they wanted to obviously bring about that obstacle for the Thunderbolts to deal with. And, after all, like, the Void is a thing in the comics, and I guess just getting right into that situation isn't too crazy. But obviously, the highlight of runtime was given to Yelena and her past, as I guess the movie didn't have all the time to get into what each person experienced in the Void, which I have to admit I felt like was a bit of a shame, but only out of being a fan wanting to see more. Because, I mean, it would have been pretty damn awesome to see what each person's own personal purgatory was. Maybe getting a flashback of Winter Soldier, a Red Guardian scene back in the day in Russia in quick bursts that could have only used up like an extra 2 or 3 minutes of screen time. They could have shot like really quick things and then boom, use that weird like purgatory smashing through the mirror thing to cut to a different character. But unfortunately, that was kind of skipped over. Now, I guess in other ways we did see, Sentry get into people's heads. So we did see John Walker being a deadbeat dad, being down this rabbit hole of what he could have had being the new Captain America and reading stories on him. We had a bit of insight into the past of Valentina. But I do want to say I totally understand when making a movie, cutting a movie. I mean, for all we know, by the way, they could have done something like what I was suggesting, but it could be on the cutting room floor. You can't do everything, as it could interrupt the pacing to other factors. But either way, through choosing to focus on Yelena's, well, that was obviously strong enough. It was very moving. So I think the use of Sentry's Void persona coming into play was still an execution that paid off well, but it would have been cool to see other powers from Sentry be highlighted, but maybe they're saving that for the future because obviously in the post-credit scene, he's like, well, I can't do this without getting into Sentry mode, but maybe you'll find out that he can do some other things, with the Sun-esque related powers. And by the way, I hope when Sentry came back to being Bob, that those people who reappeared, I don't know about anyone else. I was kind of thinking about the people who were in the chopper. Like, they disappeared up there. The chopper's, like, crashed into the city, but does that mean they're just like, bleep, and start falling down? I'm just going to say comic book logic, no. Like, even though other people appeared right where they appeared before, like that little girl, I assume that just like how Sentry came back out of his suit on the ground, he would have saved those other people. That would be probably nitpicking stuff because you can logic that. But then there is Sentry's suit, which I have to admit, I've seen all kinds of commentary about, but I didn't really quite know how to feel about when I first saw it. It's not that I hated it, but there was just something where I was like, oh, like, it has a lot of the MCU lines situation going on, and I know clearly that's the thing that people don't like about the Superman suit over in the DCU, and the golden look they gave just made me kind of wish that they went with something a bit more plated, like, the gold of Dr. Fate's helmet in Black Adam or something like that. But then again, that could have been a bit too much, with shiny plating. Either way, though, speaking of design here, I think the design of the Void, like, persona that he has was done really, really well, with it just being completely black, with the two eyes just being visible. That was really, really cool. It's like super simple, but it was creepy at points, and the way the Void's darkness just went over the city. Again, you don't need to do some kind of extravagant kind of Void where you could imagine in the early 2000s they would have tried to CGI his body and you could see like the sun and the stars or the universe into him, like he was a walking green screen. It's like, no, just completely black out the character, and like that could be just an interesting creative choice in of itself. Taskmaster. I know I haven't really mentioned Taskmaster until now when talking about other Thunderbolts, but I suppose all I have to say is that the way they handled that death is just symbolic for how that character was handled in general. And maybe, to be honest, I feel like this was them literally acknowledging that as well, like ripping the plaster off and just being like, yeah, we probably won't invest the time to kind of repair or like, make this character something that's better, so we're just going to end it. Now, I don't think that means you're going to get the Taskmaster theory coming in as a replacement. I just don't see them following up with another one anytime soon. So that's all I really have to say about that. But okay, since I keep rambling and rambling, let's get to the ending and the post-credits and my rambly thoughts about that. So, of course, we had Valentina somewhat forcing them to be put in the position for the Thunderbolts to be the new Avengers. Something everyone kind of saw coming. I think the theory at the time was that it will say Dark Avengers at the end or something like that. But then this gets into that post-credit scene with the Guardian serial thing, which was enjoyable, but I felt like, I don't know if they should have swapped it around. The 14 months later one being first and then that other one right at the end, because, that's a less important, less serious one. But, I still enjoyed it. But we need to talk about the actual post-credit scene and just the idea and concept of the new Avengers and everything that happened there with that other tease. So in the post-credit scene right at the very end, which was shot on the production of Avengers Doomsday, as confirmed by the director recently, we jump 14 months into the future, and we have Captain America, Sam, having major issues with the new Avengers being the Avengers, even down to the point of where he filed for copyright of the name. There might be a lawsuit, and Bucky has tried making it work out through talking to him, but it didn't go so well. And that's kind of sad, considering the friendship they'd got through Falcon and the Winter Soldier and whatnot. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes moving forward, considering Sam, in Brave New World, is meant to be setting up and forming a new Avengers. And from what I can remember, by the way, I'm struggling to remember, but I remember looking at Bucky thinking, I think I really like that design for, his new Avengers costume. But overall, I was kind of a little bit surprised with how okay I was with this team, essentially, for now, being branded as the new Avengers of the MCU, and just 14 months later, seeing them in that new status quo with these new designs. And not that this was ever really intended by these new Avengers to be the new Avengers, but that's what makes it all the more this unique situation. And I also like what Jake Schreier said with how they put a lot of thought into that initial credit sequence, showing the uncertainty from the world about these new Avengers, to then, feelings of, okay, this could work, as those stories, those newspapers were appearing on screen throughout the 14 months time jump, I guess. And the bonus is that, guess what? I like the characters. Like, obviously, it's not Tony Stark, Thor, and Steve Rogers and whatnot. And sure, some of those characters are still out there, so who knows what the future holds there, other than, of course, Doomsday and Secret Wars. But on the bottom line, I am invested to see where these characters go in this, as I said, new status quo of like Avengers lineup in the MCU. That's when out of nowhere, Marvel spoil the end of Fantastic Four and show an interdimensional shift that they get a visual of, and it's the Fantastic Four in their ship popping into this universe, the sacred timeline, if you will. Now, I joke about that because, I mean, we kind of all knew that the Fantastic Four were on their way to this Earth, but yeah, obviously it kind of makes it a lot clearer now that they must surely lose to Galactus or something for them to feel like they need to yeet themselves out of their own version of Earth to the point of causing an interdimensional shift to join the MCU. Like, or I don't know. Like, I can't say for certain, but hey, we know they're coming, you know, so you have to wonder with Galactus's footprint going through the city like Godzilla at the end, they're like, okay, right, bye, see ya, and they're off. Probably not going to end like that, probably going to be a lot more dramatic, but very intrigued, very intrigued. Expected, but interesting nonetheless. But we also have mention in that dialogue between the new Avengers that they have a space crisis going on, which I guess means the Fantastic Four return right at the end here is at the literal precipice of Avengers Doomsday happening. So it probably picks up moments, maybe, even after this very scene. Now, what is the space crisis? I mean, I don't really know, like possible incursions forming. I mean, again, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know. I don't think anyone truly knows, but space crisis gotta be related to like whatever propels truly the plot forward in Avengers Doomsday. Those are my overall thoughts, guys, on Thunderbolts. I think that's everything I kind of wanted to get into. Maybe I could have spoken about more things spoilery, but I think you get the overall vibe here and the overall discussion series podcasty episode on my thoughts on the movie. So with that being said, if you're still watching, I guess you've seen the movie or you just don't care about spoilers. Let me know what you thought of my thoughts. Are you going to see it? If you don't care about spoilers and you're still watching, let me know if you have seen it, and let me know your thoughts on my thoughts and stuff like that. And let me know any theories, obviously, with regards to the post-credits. Either way, guys, if you got this far, would really appreciate a like on the video. Show your support for the Marvel content. That would mean a lot. But that is everything from me. So, honestly, just thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And I'll see you, Thunderbolts, fellow Thunderbolts, and new Avengers in the next video. Goodbye.